gentlemen, joining us next at the World CX Summit is going to be on the industry keynote on the topic Transforming CX Strategy with VoC. Well, we're joined by Samdani Basha, the VP CX Design and Operations Flipkart. Well, Samdani leads the customer experience design and operations functions for Flipkart, which leverages customer insights, design thinking, technology, and operational excellence to deliver baseline shifts in customer experience at Flipkart. So ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for the next 15 minutes on this lovely topic of transforming CX strategy with VoC with none other than Samdani, who's popularly known as Sam. So Sam, I just request you to, yes, you're right there. Wonderful to see you. Welcome on behalf of TressCon Global to the World CX Summit. Over to you, Sam.
Thank you so much, Bhavna, for having me on this platform to engage and interact with a couple of industry leaders across the industry. Good afternoon, all. Looks like I might be standing between you and your home-cooked lunch because you're working from home. And if it's of any comfort, I will try and make this short and promise I will not use too much jargon in the next 10 to 15 minutes of my interaction and largely focus on sharing and learning from you folks around how to leverage VoC, which is the voice of the customer, to pivot a narrative for the strategy for customer experience. Now, I believe a lot has been written out there in the media, public domain specifically, with respect to customer experience, and a lot of experts have also shared their thoughts as well on what is the right elements of a customer experience strategy. And I think just to throw a couple of data points at you, the most recent Bain study on customer feedback management tools seems to indicate an adoption rate of anywhere between 70 to 75%. And overall, about 82% of the respondents do kind of believe that they are somewhat to extremely satisfied with the suite of tools they are actually using to capture the voice of the customer. And in today's context, I think, truth be told, the numbers aside, I believe every organization will have some narrative or the other on how they hear or plan to hear about the customer and the voice of the customer. And needless to mention, some more effective than the others. A few common themes that one tends to solve for, and which is no different from what we do at Flipkart as well, is to kind of use voice of the customer to institute a very high velocity feedback loop, right from products to services to creating experiences for the customers as well. And also to kind of build lasting relationships with customers, and as a consequence, increase the lifetime value of the customer. Now, one common observation about voice of customer is that this voice, more often than not, tends to be post an experience or an interaction of the customer, by which time some part of the damage is already done, which essentially results in, for the bad voice of the customer, your customers turning into detractors. Well, some organizations do have an experience recovery construct that follows a bad experience delivery. This is not without the attendant implications of not having done it right the first time itself, which is where I'd like to pivot the narrative on, can I somehow stay ahead of this game by predicting the voice of the customer and predicting this voice basis the journey experience of a similar groups of customers who went through a similar experience in the past, and then can we give this entire narrative a proactive and a positive spin to the experience, and essentially look at an experience of the customer, followed by the voice of the customer, followed by the actions of the customer. So an experience voice action loop. And this is something wherein we've done lots of work and had paid some rich dividends for us as well. And I believe by making significant investments in this particular area of this fundamentally pivoting on the voice of the customer, one can create a flywheel for experience recovery and experience reinforcement and growth. Now, needless to mention, this tends to pay very, very rich dividends for organizations in their experience journey. While VoC tends to be equated with documented feedback by the customer, both qualitative and quantitative, as you would all know, it has its own inherent limitations in terms of sample size, the bias, the coverage, and all of that stuff, right? And I believe there's a very, very compelling case for predicting the voice of the customer through three key levers, which is largely better monitoring the customer journey node experience, using lots and lots of data and analytics to contextualize a couple of things. One is the relative importance of a node to the customer and what it actually means to the customer. And obviously, the importance will vary across different cohorts and personas. And lastly, can we use historical behavior of similar groups of customers to predict their voice and their attended actions for the future? Now, like I said, we've been doing this for some time at Flipkart and have been weaving our strategy narrative into fundamentally 4 broad principles of a CX strategy. And we call them as proactive experience management as the most important tower for us as part of the strategy house. We also talk about, for stuff that falls through the cracks, a narrative around how do I do a spectacular experience recovery? And then there is this whole customer journey simplification and personalization. And finally, because of our scale, this unrelenting focus on leveraging technology for scale. So if you look at the first 3 towers, proactive, experience recovery, and the journey simplification and personalization, heavily rely on our ability to kind of determine what does the customer actually like, how do I extract that particular signal and use it in a very, very meaningful way to, one is define the strategy and also make some definitive choices in terms of how we orchestrate the customer journey. In an oversimplified sense today at Flipkart, right, we process more than about close to 50 million transactions per year in terms of how customers have been reacting to all our order journey nodes and so on and so forth, right? And we process these signals from millions of interactions every day across the shopping journey. And right from search to selection to price and the customer feedback loop there. As a case in point, a customer could have added a product to the cart, but could possibly be sitting there idle, just hoping to get a better deal. And the fact today is in terms of we do capture that particular signal and provide small nudges to the customer, because the stated voice of the customer is practically nothing here, but the unstated voice of the customer is in terms of, hey, Flipkart, I might be looking for a discount. Can you catch the signal and can actually help me kind of get to kind of purchasing this particular product? So we do capture all these signals across all the journey nodes, like I said, right from search, selection, price, all the way up to the order fulfillment process as well, and which includes your delivery and then the journey nodes such as returns and refunds as well. And we fundamentally extract insights from all of these interactions and then assign something called a journey score for 2 entities. One is the transaction itself, which is much more tactical in nature. The other, from a relationship perspective, is a score for the customer. And we call this the incident journey score for the interaction and the customer journey score for the customer. And between these 2 scores, which essentially is capturing feedback from that customer, we have a very high confidence proxy signal for the voice of the customer and then the attended actions as well. And this has been opening up lots of possibilities for us. One immediate implication, obviously, for us has been the CX strategy and the focus that we actually have with the CX strategy and the specific outcomes we're actually solving for, right from elimination of incidents to reduction of the journey cycle time to other conventional metrics like satisfaction and NPS. And last but not the least, the silent sufferers and the outlier management. And this is something that we have been able to make some really, really good progress on by focusing on the voice. And this becomes a very integral part of the CX strategy as we try to kind of move the bar with respect to customer experience. Now, let me take a little bit of a deep dive in terms of the how part, in terms of how we've been orchestrating journey, hoping to share and also kind of learn from you folks as well, right? Now, like I said, we index on proactive CX. That's the #1 most important imperative for us from a strategy standpoint. And here the North Star for us is we treat an incident as an indication of a pain for the customer, as an indication of a friction for the customer. And we over-index on reducing incidents at the contact center. And basis the historical VoC of the customer, we also try to see how we can prioritize machine serve versus self-serve versus agent serve, basis the customer propensity. Not everybody is well-versed with interacting with bots, for instance. And with our relentless focus on acquiring new customers as well, there is historical precedent, which is once again the voice of the customer. And we actually take that. And then, like I said, every customer gets assigned a particular score. Using this combination of the journey scores, both the incident and the customer, we almost track about close to 20 plus attributes across all these journey nodes. Now, this, like I said, ends up as a good proxy for the customer anxiety, despite the customer not explicitly calling this out. And it is also a good predictor of escalations for us, right, from leadership to social media and so on and so forth. And with a great degree of confidence, we are able to correlate a higher score with higher pain. And now that we actually have this score, we prioritize customer cohorts based on this particular score. Now, as you can imagine, when you actually do an online transaction, specific to the e-commerce space, there are handoffs across multiple teams, across L1, L2, L3 teams, and so on and so forth. But the primary driver of the resolution here becomes these scores. And the entire org rallies itself around this particular score and pivots on the score to provide a resolution that is essentially green channeled for the customer. And this green channeling basis happens our assessment of the customer effort and the anxiety. Now, like I alluded to in the past, right, over the past 2 years, we have processed over 100 million incidents at the contact center and have subjected us to a fair bit of machine learning models that have significantly enhanced our understanding of the customer voice and the actions. And the whole graduation that we did from a tactical incident journey score to a much more strategic narrative around the customer using the customer journey score is where we have been able to successfully bridge the gap between the historical voice of the customer and the actions of the customer. And we've developed a very, very accurate view of the propensity of the customer to churn from the platform based on the journey experience. And for the customers who are likely to churn out because of degraded experience, there is a massive orchestration that happens across the organization. A simple case of, let's say, a delay in refund, right? Now, the customer could possibly not care about it, but what we try and avoid doing here is in terms of the whole notion of death by 1,000 cuts. Now, you could have small irritants over an extended time period, which could result in permanently losing a particular customer. But the focus here is in terms of capture that signal and look at small events as well, and start computing a score for that customer, despite the customer not explicitly crying out loud and giving us feedback there. And then take that score, intervene proactively, and ensure that the journey and the resolution is prioritized. Now, the beauty of all of this is, I believe, we've been able to successfully and proactively address silent sufferers on the platform as well, who would have otherwise quietly churned out of the platform to competitors. I believe a lot has been said in terms of, I think, the voice of the customer, the relative importance of it, and how organizations effectively use it, right? But in summary, in the context of Flipkart, in the spirit of time as well, right? Through proactive experience recovery, we largely pivot on voice of the customer. We preempt customer effort and anxiety across the nodes through timely interventions. And building on this combination of incident and the customer journey score, we've been able to successfully capture a very strong signal for dissatisfaction, and as an extension, a propensity of the customer to churn out. And this, like I said, is based on voice and actions, resulting in an attempt to green channel the customer experience based on the signal. Needless to mention, this effort has helped us reduce customer effort, deliver better experience, and also reduce churn. Lastly, from a journey simplification perspective, we've been able to successfully and proactively eliminate roadblocks across the customer journey and also reducing the timeliness of the resolution. And based on the customer feedback, we've also been able to kind of establish channel preferences for customer for effective resolution. As you would all be aware, I think I'll make a very cliche sentence, right? I think customers in India do love to talk, and all the more new customers, all the more like to talk. So there is this fair bit of a profiling of past experience, and we are pivoting a narrative around basis the voice of the customer. How do I work on a channel agnostic experience construct? And what I mean by that is voice as a medium tends to deliver far more superior experience to customers with respect to CSATs and resolution rates and so on and so forth, versus, let's say, the asynchronous email as a channel, as an example. We normally see about a 20 percentage points delta out there. And once again, basis the customer preferences for intrusive versus non-intrusive assistance, we've been able to successfully use the voice of the customer to kind of pivot and present the right channel to the customer to ensure that there is an optimal issue, channel selection, and experience combination as well. So these are a couple of places wherein I believe we have had the luxury of having some great successes in terms of at least the North Star metrics for the customer experience teams, and a fair bit of leverage of the voice of the customer, both stated as well as unstated, in the broader scheme of, let's say, how do I make that an integral part of the strategy? So that's pretty much what I actually had to share with you all in this limited 10 to 15 minutes of time frame. Thank you for having me here once again.
Thank you so much, Sam, for this wonderful set of guidelines you've given, spoken about the journey as well of how Flipkart is in particular, doing it. I've in fact written down certain pointers, which I'm going to be also sharing it and tagging you along with me on LinkedIn as well as to what the key takeaways are, because I really loved what your insights were. So once again, thank you so much, Sam, for joining us and being a part of the World CX Summit.